Good
evening and welcome to the Institute of Jewish Knowledge and Learning. We're here tonight with Dr. Sandra Lilienthal, and we're going to talk about how Jewish is Thanksgiving. Over to you, Sandra.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's a huge honor to be asked to deliver an address to our community. And every time Kim does that, I feel that, why are you asking me? I teach classes. I don't know how to do addresses. And then she says, yes, you do. Yes, you do. You're good at this. So I hope that I really can convey something that is meaningful to you, besides giving you a little bit of a history lesson in terms of Thanksgiving and Judaism. So I will open with a story that happens every year, and I shared with some of you earlier today. It never, ever fails. Comes mid-November, and my non-Jewish friends are profoundly overwhelmed. And they are, oh my goodness, there's Thanksgiving coming up, and it's a huge meal, and there's so much cooking and baking that needs to be done, and everybody comes, and the family dynamics are so difficult to handle, and it is so overwhelming. And I just smile to myself thinking, I have 2 Thanksgiving meals every week. And last month, I had 18 of them in a space of 3 weeks. So I really don't understand what it means that you cannot handle one Thanksgiving meal, because our meals also involve a lot of cooking, a lot of baking, and yes, a lot of family drama. So I know exactly what you're dealing with, but we do that too. It's hard for me to have some sympathy for that. But once I get over my sense of Jewish martyrdom, then I can, move on. So Thanksgiving was a completely foreign concept for me. I grew up in Brazil, and in Brazil, we do have a Thanksgiving Day. It is called Dia de Ação de Graças, which means exactly that, a day of giving thanks. It's the same day as it is in the United States, but it's a very different holiday. It is a completely Catholic holiday. And what I mean by this is, if you open your windows, you will see people walking on the streets carrying crosses on their knees. It is a day when they go to the churches, paying the promises, oaths that they made to God, to Jesus, to whoever, that if they were granted some kind of favor that they wanted, this is how they would pay it back. They would walk on their knees, etc. TV channels were not allowed to have any kind of normal programming, and all we had on TV were masses all day long. So although I grew up in a completely secular family, we did know that Thanksgiving was not a holiday for us, just as we knew Christmas was not a holiday for us. But I will say that even Christmas was better than Thanksgiving, because Christmas was more secular. What I mean by this is like, okay, a Christmas tree, gifts, Christmas carols was less Christian, at least on the outside, than a holiday when people are carrying crosses and walking on their knees on the streets. So I moved to the United States, and I was shocked to see Jews celebrating Thanksgiving. And some of you know, I first moved to Waco, Texas, and I assumed that being in Waco, very small Jewish population, very Christian town, that the Jews just wanted to do what their neighbors were doing, because in such communities, you don't want to be the outsider. But then I moved to Florida, South Florida, in the midst of a large Jewish community, and I noticed Jews of all denominations celebrating Thanksgiving. And at that point, I said, okay, I really do need to find out what's going on here. Why are Jews celebrating Thanksgiving? And it was at that point that I started doing some research and found out that there are connections between Judaism and Thanksgiving that really, really go very, very deep. So I'm going to assume that everybody knows the American story of Thanksgiving, the Pilgrims, the natives, the harvest, etc. So I'm not going to go over that. I'm only going to focus on the Jewish connection. So the Pilgrims were Puritans, a specific group of Christians, and the Puritans strongly identified with historical traditions and with customs of the Hebrew Bible. which they obviously called the Old Testament. They saw their journey to America as being completely parallel to the exodus of the Jews from Egypt. So for them, England had been their Egypt, a place where they were not free to be who they really were. They were not free to practice the religion the way they believed it should be. They were not free to share their beliefs or publicly speak about them. The king was compared to Pharaoh, an imposing presence who called the shots and who literally controlled their lives. For the Puritans, crossing the Atlantic was symbolic of the crossing of the Sea of Reeds that the Israelites had done when they left Egypt. And they saw themselves in this imagery as the Israelites. So, as we say in the Exodus story, if this were all, we could say, okay, it's enough to say that Thanksgiving has a Jewish root, right? Dayenu. But honestly, there's a lot more. The Puritans all had Hebrew names, and they envisioned that Hebrew would be the language of the colonies. Now think about this. This actually means that we could have been brought up in a country speaking Hebrew, because that is the way they imagined America would be. Let me expand a little bit on this. As they were fleeing from persecution in England over 400 years ago, Pilgrim passengers on the Mayflower brought with them their source of inspiration, their source of comfort, which was the Bible. Now, there's one particular edition of the Bible that had been published in 1618 that is known to have been in possession of William Bradford, who would later become the governor of Plymouth Colony. So this edition, 1618 edition of the Bible, had annotations by a Puritan scholar by the name of Henry Ainsworth. So there are some interesting facts about Bradford that are not known to several of us. For example, if you have ever visited his grave in Plymouth, you would know that there is an obelisk there that marks the exact spot where he is buried and has his name. But above the engraved English words, there are words etched in Hebrew. To most tourists, they don't even understand that that's Hebrew. They just see a little bit of designs, and they don't know what that is. But for us, when we look at that, it is fascinating, because what those words say is Adonai Ezer Chayai. The Lord is the help of my life, but in Hebrew. And so we think about the fact that this man, who was a Christian, who basically led the people to America, had this connection that he refers to God as Adonai, no mention of Jesus, Adonai Ezer Chayai, and that he asked for this to be put on his headstone in Hebrew is quite impressive. Actually, Bradford had a fascination with Hebrew, and at the end of his life, he began learning Hebrew. Now, he explained why he was learning Hebrew by saying that he really wanted to read the Bible, but from the original, not from a translation. And he said, I want to see with my own eyes what this ancient language and holy language is teaching. I want to know what things are named after creation. And so he wanted to know the Hebrew words. He wanted to understand the text that he was reading from the original text. So he started learning Hebrew. Also, as you can imagine, in the 1620s or 1618, 1620s, paper is not readily available. He doesn't have pen and paper or an iPad to take notes right next to him. So he starts making notes of words in the front of the manuscript of his history of the plantation. So he wrote a history of the plantation, which is famous, and every white space in that book has Hebrew words. He has over 900 Hebrew words handwritten in that manuscript. The first 8 words are 8 different names for God, the way Judaism does have several different names. So the people that followed him had the same idea that they wanted to understand Tanakh, the Bible, in its original. And this is why not only did they want to learn Hebrew, but maybe most importantly, they wanted to read the commentaries of old rabbis. When I say old rabbis, they're in the 1600s. They're looking at commentaries from Rashi, 1100s, from Maimonides, from people in those areas of expertise. Why? Because they felt that if they had to read something that was not in the original, it was better to have access to a text written by Jews commenting on the Bible than Christians commenting on the Bible. Why? Because they felt it would be closer to the original intent of the text. So Bradford's engagement with Jewish tradition actually started on the Mayflower itself, right? Besides the Bible that he brought with him, he also had a commentary on the Book of Psalms written by Henry Ainsworth. And while Ainsworth was really interested in reading about all the rabbis and their comments on the biblical text, one of his favorites were Maimonides. And he had studied Maimonides, whom he called the wisest of the Hebrew rabbis, right? I love the Hebrew rabbis, as if there are rabbis that weren't Hebrew rabbis, right? But that's how he referred to them. And he cites Maimonides to explain Psalm 107. Now, Psalm 107 is a psalm of thanksgiving, which I'm going to read to you but I have to read. I don't know, obviously don't know it by heart. Praise the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love is eternal. Thus let the redeemed of the Lord say, those he redeemed from adversity, whom he gathered in from the lands, from east and west, from north and from the sea. Some lost their way in the wilderness, in the wasteland. They found no settled place. Hungry and thirsty, their spirit failed. In their adversity, they cried to the Lord, and he rescued them from their troubles. He showed them a direct way to reach a settled place. Let them praise the Lord for his steadfast love, his wondrous deeds for mankind. For he has satisfied the thirsty, filled the hungry with all good things. That's just part of the psalm. The psalm continues, but I want you to see that there is an imagery here in the psalm about God taking people out of one place, bringing to another. There is the idea that God travels with them. And when Ainsworth speaks about Psalm 107, he talks about the need to express gratitude to God after crossing the wilderness, which is what the psalm is referring to. And he says it's not just the wilderness, it also talks about the seas. You have to thank God when you cross a treacherous body of water. Now, shortly after they arrive in November of 1620, Bradford takes everybody that is there with him and says, we actually need to recite Psalm 107, thanking God for having allowed us to travel safely. What's really interesting is that Ainsworth, in his original commentary of the Psalms, says the following, and I'm reading again, I'm quoting, and from this psalm and this verse of it, referring to verse 32, the Hebrews have this canon: 4 must confess unto God, the sick when he is healed, the prisoner when he is released out of bonds, they that go down to sea when they are come up to land, and wayfaring men when they are come to the inhabited land. And they must make confession before 10 men, and 2 of them wise men. And the manner of confessing and blessing is thus: he stands among them and blesses the Lord, the King eternal, that bountifully rewarded good things unto sinners, etc., etc. And then he cites Maimonides in his Mishneh Torah, Treatise of Blessings, chapter 10, section 8. So it is fascinating to me that what's happening here is as follows. They arrive, Ainsworth says, hey, Maimonides said that because we crossed the sea, which is dangerous, and we arrived safely, we have to be thankful and say prayers of thanksgiving. What he's referring to is what we still do today. It's called Birkat HaGomel. When somebody is sick and recovers, you say a blessing. And today, when you travel by plane and you cross the sea, technically speaking, you are supposed to say Birkat HaGomel when you come back, even though it is not as dangerous as it was before. But it's really interesting because what is happening now is as the pilgrims arrive safely at Cape Cod, they express gratitude, not because of the harvest, which is the story that you learned. They express gratitude first for having crossed the sea safely. And based on the fact that Maimonides said that we had to do this, and using Psalm 107, which is where Maimonides gets it from. So it is very, very interesting to me. We don't learn this. We learn that Thanksgiving is a holiday in which they celebrated the harvest. That is also true, but that is a second layer added afterwards. Now, Jewish holidays also have different layers. We all know this. Shavuot is a great example. Shavuot starts as a holiday of harvest and then becomes a holiday of receiving the Torah, right? There are different layers. It doesn't take away from the gratitude for the harvest. But the original Thanksgiving was not the first official Thanksgiving, which is in 1621. It is in 1620 when they land and they thank God for having crossed the sea safely. So that to me is like a clear indication that the American Thanksgiving is based on Judaism. George W. Bush, speaking to the parliament in Israel, to the Knesset years ago, actually made mention to this, saying, the alliance between our governments is unbreakable, yet the source of our friendship runs deeper than any treaty. It is grounded in the shared spirit of our people, the bonds of the book, and obviously he's referring to the Bible, and the ties of the soul. And he continues, when William Bradford stepped off the Mayflower in 1620, he quoted the words of Jeremiah, "Come, let us declare in Zion the word of God." The founders of my country sought a new promised land and bestowed upon their towns names like Bethlehem and New Canaan. And in time, many Americans became passionate advocates for a Jewish state. So regardless of the political, what George Bush was trying to achieve here, the point is really that the first people to come and to thank God in America did so in a way that was based in Judaism, based on the history of the Israelites that had left Egypt, left oppression, and gone to a free land, based on the ways to commemorate or to be thankful to God that Jews had established and did for many, many years. And they even represented that, if you look at, historically speaking, the seal, the first seal of the United States, actually has an image of Pharaoh and the crossing of the sea, indicating that they saw themselves as this group of people that were just like the Israelites, leaving the bondage and going into a free land. Washington's letter, George Washington's letter to the Jews of Savannah, which is a very well-known letter, also mentioned this bond and also mentioned the fact that the Pilgrims instituted in America Jewish customs. So now that we have established that this idea of a ceremony to thank God for the successful crossing of the sea was certainly Jewish-based, now I want to expand this a little more, not just the holiday itself, but the idea of giving thanks, which is, of course, the main idea of the holiday today. Today, we are not thanking God for having crossed the sea. Today, we're thanking God for a series of things that have happened to us and that have been granted to us. And that, too, is a profoundly Jewish value. So Judaism has, in its foundation, in its basis, the idea that you have to give thanks. You open your eyes in the morning, and the first thing that you're supposed to do before you get out of bed is to say a very short prayer called Modeh Ani, in which we thank God for actually having restored our soul and given us another day. Now, the exact translation of Modeh Ani is, I give thanks before you, King, living and eternal, for you have returned my soul to me with compassion, and great is your faithfulness. Modeh Ani can be read, Modeh Ani can be sung, but what is most important for me is that Modeh Ani has an assumption. And the assumption is you are not to take one more day for granted. Now, some of you have heard me say already, the majority of us, even if you say no, you do. You take tomorrow for granted. And I can tell you how I know that you take tomorrow for granted. Because if you have plans on what you're going to do tomorrow, it's because you're taking tomorrow for granted. And we all have. We have lists of things that we need to do. And, oh, tomorrow I'm going to do this, tomorrow I'm going to do that. The minute we're saying tomorrow I'm going to do this, tomorrow I'm going to do that, there is an assumption that there will be a tomorrow. And the only time in our lives when we do not have that is when we are very, very ill. And then we realize that there might not be a tomorrow. But the truth is, there's no guarantee that you're going to have a tomorrow, even when you're not that ill. And so Modeh Ani is a way to remind a Jew that as you wake up, you thank God for an extra day. That is the first thing you do before you get up, before you go to the bathroom, before you wash your hands. There's a whole ritual of what you do when you wake up. But the first thing you do is you recognize that this day is a blessing, that having this day is a blessing, and you thank God. Now, I asked Kim last week, I said, Kim, I know this is an address and not a class. Can I show a video? And Kim said, you can do whatever you want. So I want to share with you a very cute video, which is a Modeh Ani. I mean, I know several songs from Modeh Ani. You know, a lot of people have composed melodies from Modeh Ani, but this is one of the most different ones, which is why I'm bringing it up. So bear with me here. I am going to make this bigger so that you can, there we go.
Good morning, everybody. Boker Tov.
Boker Or,
We're
y'all.
gonna wake up Texas style now. Y'all ready to sing with me? Well, even if you're not, I'm gonna sing it right now. So here we go. Modeh Ani
Modeh Ani
lefanecha
lefanecha
melech chai v'kayam שחזרת בי נשמתי בחמלה רבה אמונתך מודה אני
Modeh Ani
לפניך
lefanecha
מלך חי וקיים שחזרת בי נשמתי בחמלה רבה אמונתך מודה אני.
So you get the idea, right? The reason I love this is not just because it's cute and it's adorable, etc. I love it because I think it translates the Jewish idea of giving thanks very well. Meaning, it doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to be in a heavy way. It doesn't have to be in what we usually call holy. And I'm going to get back to this in a minute about this idea that giving thanks is supposed to be on everything, right? And that there is no specific style of saying thanks. You see, to wake up in the morning is really to be reborn. Just as we are so excited when somebody is born, we should be excited when we wake up in the morning. The first word of the prayer, moda or modeh, depending if it's a man or a woman, is I am thankful. The essence of modeh is to acknowledge the gifts that we have been given, the blessings that we have. Right after this, if you say modeh and you get up and you go wash your hands, etc., what do you do next? Judaism says, now you're going to recite Birkot HaShachar, the blessings that you say, the morning blessings that you say. And what are these morning blessings? Blessings where you thank God for enabling the rooster to distinguish between night and day, right? For having made human beings in his image, who has made us as Jews. I'm thankful to be a Jew. I'm thankful to be created in God's image. I thank God for having made me free, that I can wake up in the morning and like the Puritans or like the Israelites that have left Egypt, I am free. I thank God who gives sight to the blind, and it is not meant literally. It is how many times are we blind in our lives, and then we have that, right? Who gives clothing to people, who releases those who are bound, who raises the downtrodden, who creates heaven and earth. So we keep going through this list of things that God does, and we thank God for all of these things. Again, things that may seem every day. How many of us, when you got dressed, say, oh, thank you, God, for giving me clothes. I'm so happy that I have clothes, right? Again, it's the taking for granted. You just take for granted that you wake up in the morning, you open your closet, and there's clothes for you to wear. Well, you shouldn't take that for granted. So again, this idea of giving thanks is infused in Jewish thought. The Talmud says that every Jew must say 100 blessings every day. And many of these 100 blessings are blessings that refer to giving thanks. Besides the ones that I already mentioned, for example, we thank God before we eat and after we eat. There's a prayer of gratitude that is added to the Amidah, which is said 3 times daily, right? For those of you who are used to synagogue regularly, the Modim is our prayer of gratitude. Look at the name of the prayer, Modim. Modim anachnu lach. Modim is the plural of modeh. Psalm 100, which we say every day, speaks about acknowledging God, about celebrating God in happiness, in joy, about everything that God does for us. And it finishes, bless God's name, because his love is eternal and he is with us always. So we're thanking God for his presence. On holidays, we add the Hallel, which is a collection of psalms of thanksgiving. But there is one that is my favorite one. And that's why I wanted to show that video of the Modeh. There's a blessing that we say every time we use the bathroom, where we thank God for making our bodies work the way that they should work, where they keep what is necessary and discard what is not necessary. And the reason why this is by far my favorite prayer of all the prayers that we say is because to see holiness in peeing and pooping, forgive me for the terms, is an extremely religious statement. What I mean by it is a religious statement is to understand that everything in our body is a gift, and that the fact that we have the things that are not used by our bodies come out and that we say to God, thank you for my poop, to me is really a religious statement. To understand that there is holiness in going to the bathroom, and that we need to thank God for that as well, is the basis of any idea that there should be a holiday where we thank God. It is true that Judaism does not have a specific holiday of Thanksgiving. But I believe that the reason why we do not have a specific Thanksgiving holiday, a day to give thanks, is because if you are told that you have to thank God every day, several times a day, for giving you life, for going to the bathroom, for having food, etc., then you don't really need a day for that. So it's not that I am against a Thanksgiving day, but I'm trying to explain if Thanksgiving is so Jewish, how come we don't have a Thanksgiving day in the Jewish calendar? And I believe that that is the reason why we don't. So Musar, for example, says that to thank God is to recognize God's kindness in a way that regards a commitment, an ethical commitment. The minute that I am thankful to what God is giving me, I am putting myself in a place where I have to give back because of all the blessings that I have. And interestingly enough, this is obviously a text that is old, 1700s, 1800s. It is interesting to note that the foundation of a day of Thanksgiving is most likely what made America one of the most volunteering countries in the world. I mean, the number of volunteer hours, I don't know if it still stands now because we live in a very individualistic society right now, but historically speaking, Americans always volunteered much more than in other nations. And most likely this comes from this foundation of Thanksgiving as a holiday, as an opportunity to thank God and to remember that you too can bring blessings to other people. So with that all being said, we do understand that the idea of being thankful, of expressing that gratitude that the Pilgrims brought into America was really founded on Jewish values and on Jewish tradition, which is why Americans were celebrating Thanksgiving and why in Brazil, we were not celebrating Thanksgiving, right? Because this is not included. But this is not a class. So I want to share with you a little bit of my views on the importance of exercising gratitude daily, of keeping the values of Thanksgiving, even if we only have one Thanksgiving a year, but that we keep the values and the teachings of Thanksgiving in our lives every single day. I don't know how many of you are familiar with a study that was done with 700 American nuns. The reason why the study was with nuns is because it was easier to isolate other factors. These people weren't married, these people did not have children. So they took, in the 1930s, they took nuns that were in their 20s at that time, and they literally followed them for over 50 years. So some 700 nuns were interviewed for the study. At this point, their ages was between 75 and 102. The first thing that they had to show was what they had done in their first interview. So when they were back in their 20s, Mother Superior had asked them to write an autobiographical account of their life and why they had chosen to enter the convent, right? So some of them had entered the convent for positive reasons, others for negative reasons, for negative emotions, right? I didn't want to get married, and my family was putting pressure on me, and this was a way that I didn't have to get married. In 2001, they published the results of the study. And the more positive emotions that each of these people had in that letter written way back then, the more likely were they to be alive and healthy 60 years later. So the study at that time concluded that gratitude improved physical health and immunity. I mean, this is amazing when you think about it, right? That being thankful reduces the toxic emotions of resentment, frustration, regret. That people who were grateful tended to sleep better and were less likely to be depressed. The people who had a habit of thankfulness had a higher level of self-respect, had better relationships with friends, with family members, with employees. They also did a study with Vietnam veterans, and they found that those with higher levels of gratitude suffered less from post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's really interesting to notice that what the studies are showing is that when we are grateful, when we appreciate the blessings that we have, we are healthier physically and emotionally. There is a reason for that. It's not just, oh, what a coincidence. In Pirkei Avot, in Ethics of the Fathers, our rabbis already said that the person who is happy is a person who rejoices in their own lot. The reality is that every single one of us has a lot of things that we have and a lot of things that we do not have, whether concrete things or spiritual things or emotional things. We all know that there is no limit to that which we do not have. You will never have everything. So you can spend your entire life focusing on what is missing. Whether I don't have good health, or I don't have good family relationships, or I don't have a good job, or I don't have a good house, or I don't have a good partner, or I don't have the latest computer. Whatever it is, we can always spend our lives focusing on that which we do not have. And to a certain way, that is how many of us spend our days, even without noticing. I give the example of FPL. If you do not live in Florida, just think about whoever is the company in your area that provides electricity. Day after day after day, dozens of times a day, if not hundreds of times a day, you turn a switch in your house and light comes on. I want to ask every single one of you, how many times have you thanked FPL for giving you the light when you turn on the switch? And if you're honest, most likely the answer is never. But the one day that you turn that switch on and there is no power, the first thing we do is complain, curse the company. How can they do this to me? I need my power. Why is there no power? I pay hundreds of dollars a month. Why do I not have power? That's a clear example of how we focus on what we don't have. And yet, all of the other times that you had power, you didn't think about being thankful for that. So I think that Judaism teaches us a very important lesson in giving thanks. I think it is not a coincidence that we are called Jews. The word Jews in Hebrew, Yehudim, shares the root with the word modim, modeh, modah, all share the same root. A Jew is a descendant of Judah. Judah was given his name by his mother Leah after 3 kids. He's number 4. She had 3 kids, and with every kid, all she wanted to was Jacob's love, which she didn't have. By the time she has kid number 4, she says, I'm going to name him Yehudah, because this time I will thank God. We are known as descendants of Judah, not as descendants of Moses, not as descendants of any other of the children, right? So as we approach Thanksgiving, I really believe that we should take the spirit of the day and that we remember to be thankful. Thankful for FPL, who gives us the light. Thankful for getting up in the morning. Thankful to God. Thankful to everyone in our lives who actually make our lives special. Whether it is family relatives, whether it is the janitor, whether it is the doctor, or the person who delivers your food with Instacart, it makes no difference. Being thankful to these people, remembering to thank these people, is ultimately good for us. As we saw in the studies, it is not just something that Judaism tells us to do. Judaism goes a step further, and there are stories about characters in our history who said it's not enough to thank people, we have to thank things. And I want to give you 3 stories, 3 examples. One is a story about Moshe. When Moshe is told that he has to hit the water of the Nile so that it turns into blood, that is plague number 1, Moshe refuses, he's resistant. And the Midrash explains that the reason he did that is because he was thankful to the river that had saved him, and that therefore he couldn't do it. Now, the truth is, it's not the river that saved him. What saved him was the basket, Miriam, Pharaoh's daughter. Yet, for Moshe, the river was part of this whole story, and therefore he owed thanks to the river, and he could not hit the river. Another story told about the Kotzker Rebbe. The Kotzker Rebbe, every time he replaced a pair of worn shoes, and let's remember, people in those days were very poor. They did not have 20 pairs of shoes in their closet. They only had 1. And when that 1 pair was worn out, then they would get a new pair. Every time he got a new pair to replace the worn out ones, he wrapped them in newspaper in a very warm as in gentle way. And then he would put them carefully in the trash. And when people would say to him, why are you doing this? It's a pair of shoes. He would say, how can I simply toss a pair of shoes who served me for the last X number of years? Another story is another rabbi, not the Kotzker Rebbe. This is Rabbi Lopian, mid-1900s, who was one talking to his students after prayer, after davening, and he was folding his tallis, right? The tallis was actually really big, and he had to rest it on a bench so that he could fold it. So after he finishes folding, he notices that the bench has a lot of dust. So he heads out and gets a paper towel to clean the bench. Now, he was a famous rabbi, full of students. His students are there watching. One of the students, when he sees what the rabbi is doing, he runs, he takes the paper towel and says to the rabbi, let me do this for you, I'll clean it. I'm not gonna let the rabbi clean the bench. And the rabbi says, no, I have to clean it myself. So the students look at him and say, why would you have to clean it yourself? And he says, I must show gratitude to the bench upon which I fold my tallis. So it's not just about saying thank you to God. And it's not just about saying thankful to people. And it's not just about saying thankful to companies that give you services that you need. It's also about being thankful to things. Why? Because the more I focus on the pair of shoes that I had that served me for 20 years, on the bench that is there when I need a place to put my tallis on, the more I am focusing on what I have, on the blessings in my life, the less I am focusing on what is missing. So create a gratitude list. I really suggest that. Every day, add to your gratitude list. It can be simple things. I am grateful for my coffee in the morning. I really am, right? That can be one of the things that go into your gratitude list. It could be, I'm thankful for a spouse. I'm thankful for a house to live in. I'm thankful for whatever. The more you add to your gratitude list, the more you can focus on the days that things are not going well. So when you are having a bad day, when things seem not to be good, when you feel like this is so unfair, why do I have to go through this? You have your gratitude book right there with you. You have a list of things to be thankful for. It does not negate what you're going through, but it helps balance. Marcia Falk, who wrote, she's a poet and a liturgist, etc. In a book called Days in Between, she wrote that gratitude is the gift that one gives oneself. When Judaism said that we should be thankful and that we should say thank you many times a day, it wasn't because God needs our thank yous. It's because we need our thank yous. So years ago, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi wrote a specific prayer, which I'm happy to share with you, to be added to the Birkat Hamazon, to be said at the Thanksgiving meal. So some of you might know that when we are saying Birkat Hamazon, the blessing that we say after we have a festive meal, after we ate bread, for Purim and for Hanukkah, there is an addition referring to that specific day. So Rabbi Zalman actually wrote a prayer, I'll read it for you, to be read on Thanksgiving during the Birkat Hamazon. And he said everybody should be saying Birkat Hamazon on Thanksgiving. And this is what he wrote. In the days of the Puritan pilgrims, when they arrived in the land of their haven and suffered from hunger and cold, and sang and prayed to the rock of their salvation, you stood by them in their time of trouble and aroused the compassion of the native Indians, who gave them food, fowl, corn, and many other delicacies. You saved them from starving and suffering, and you showed them the ways of peace with the inhabitants of the land. Feeling gratitude, they established, therefore, a day of thanksgiving every year for future generations to remember, and they feed the unfortunate with feasts of thanksgiving. Therefore, do we also thank you for all the goodness in our lives. God of kindness, Lord of peace, we thank you. Now, historically, there are some issues here, right? I mean, first of all, we would not use the word Indians anymore. When he wrote it, it was still acceptable. And also, it is not that the pilgrims were that wonderful towards the natives. Okay. But the fact is that he took the Jewish foundation of Thanksgiving and he brought it back on the other side, adding a Jewish element to a Thanksgiving meal. The recognizing of the good in our lives, which leads us to say thanks, is called Hakarat HaTov in Judaism. It is recognizing that we have more than we don't have. no matter what you're lacking in your life, and everybody is lacking something, there is something more to be thankful for. And I'll end with a little joke that is said frequently. How do we know that God celebrates Thanksgiving? So for those of you who speak Hebrew, you'll understand it. And if you don't, I'll translate it in a second. Hodu ladonai ki tov. Now, Hodu ladonai ki tov is a quote from Psalms, and it means give thanks to the Lord, for God is good, right? Hodu, give thanks. See the same root as modeh, as Yehudim, etc. Right? Hodu ladonai, give thanks to God. Ki tov, because he is good. The thing is that the word hodu in Hebrew also means turkey. So hodu ladonai, the turkey to God is good. So if I use the word hodu not as give thanks, but if I use the word as turkey, right, we know that God celebrates Thanksgiving. I think what we learn from all of this is that it is important for us to take Thanksgiving Day how it was originally meant to be. It is not just a historical day. We are not just celebrating an American historical fact. We are celebrating a group of people that when they landed in this side of the world said, we are thankful to God and we are going to praise God and thank God, following the example of the Israelites, of the Jews. And with a citation of Maimonides and a psalm that comes from our Bible, they create the first Thanksgiving in 1620, which is then followed the next year by the established holiday of Thanksgiving in 1621. So 400 years later, here we are remembering the Jewish origins of Thanksgiving and celebrating Thanksgiving both as Americans and as Jews. Kim.
Imagine that you found the words to inspire us. Thank you. We give thanks for the platform that IJKL offers that allows us to have you as our teacher. We give thanks to the faculty, to the people who support from the behind the scenes and sometimes in the front, at the front door. Thank you, Deborah Lesk. Layla has joined our team. And to
this incredible community, Kim, that you have built.
Thank you. Thank you. And one of the things that I'd like to, we will be renewing the Hanukkah celebration in person at my house. It'll be led this year by Rabbi David Paskin. Rabbi Akiva promised he'd show up by Zoom. The book review, The Orchard, gives such a great insight into the Talmudic times of Rabbi Akiva. There's 3 weeks of all you want to know about Hanukkah. And I'm just touched the tip of the iceberg. I see some people on this Zoom that we don't see regularly. Please add us to your calendar. We want to see you and connect with you as well. And again, thank you. That's all I got. Mwah.
Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, everybody, and begin your gratitude journal.